Great. Well, thanks, Sabrina, for an awesome intro. Yeah, let's dive straight into it, right? So how do we make architecture more user-centered? And I guess, like, more importantly, why? And what's the benefits of doing it? And we'll kind of absolutely dive into that. Yeah, Sabrina said, right, I'm Rob. I'm a tech principal, but in role as a tech director for our private sector portfolio in the UK. I reckon, on reflection and preparing for this talk, probably half or more of my career has been spent on modernization projects of one form or another. And I've worn or had the badge of kind of insert your favorite prefix of architect for most of those projects, right? And I've seen the benefits of agile and iterative delivery on legacy modernization projects. And lately, I think, kind of like the benefits of expanding my own kind of architecture horizons to include more human-centered aspects and design and kind of product thinking aspects into my architectural thinking has really paid off and brought a whole load of benefits with it as well.
Cool. And hi, everyone. I'm Gabe Fender. And Sabrina, thanks for the intro and setting it up so nicely. I'm a product and design principal in the UK, and Rob and I have worked really closely together on a legacy modernization program. And although I'm not related to the founder of Fender guitars, I do currently live in the same city as the musician Sam Fender. So 10 points to anyone who knows where that is. But like Rob, I've worked on a number of big legacy modernization programs spanning multiple years in banking, finance, B2B, public sector, and I've seen the benefits of that focus on users and especially that service design approach where you're looking at a holistic view of everything that's going on, not just a narrow technical analysis view that sometimes we can fall into with legacy systems as a start. So yeah, hopefully you get something from that today from us. So that's a bit about us. It'd be great to know a little bit about you. And I should be getting a poll launching at this little panel on the right-hand side. If you could answer these questions for us. So first, what is your role? Just to give us an idea of who's out there, who's listening. And also, have you worked, or what is your experience working on modernization programs from various different experiences here? So I think we should be getting launching at this little panel on the right-hand side. If you could answer these questions. So we'll just give it a few seconds. Hopefully you're seeing that come up on your screen. Cool. We've just got notice in our chat that the polls are live, so we're on a little bit of a delay, but thanks everybody. We should be seeing results coming through quickly to us. But thanks for the patience. It's useful just for us as we're talking about some of this stuff, especially where tech and design mix, just to get a feel for experience out there and your different roles of who's involved. So we can try to tailor a few of our responses to who's listening. So appreciate the quick few minutes to just get a feel for that. Cool. So it looks like we're getting a few things through. Looks like half of people out there look like they're designers, some product managers, engineering, developers, cool, and mix of legacy modernization experiences from some out there that went well, a little bit more having nightmares and still in it. We feel your pain. Hopefully we have some tips for you. A few working on it now, and yeah, definitely to prefer not to think about it. That is a very common and understood approach to it. At some point you will have to think about it. So yeah, we'll give you some tools to equip you for that. So thanks for everyone for that. I think we can move on.
And I noticed there's no one who kind of self-identifies as an architect in there. So if I'll try my best to make sure I don't use any kind of terms that might confuse people if they feel less familiar with what architecture and kind of being an architect is all about. But like diving into it, what are we covering or going to be covering just now? So as I said, why we need architecture to be more user-centered, how to go about making it more user-centered, and hopefully some very practical kind of things you can take away and kind of try putting into place when you get back to your work. And then obviously the payoff and the benefits, what happens when you do these practices. So legacy, what do we mean by legacy? Now, in the context of this talk, right, technology becomes legacy when either it represents significant risk to your business, okay, or is holding it back. And Gabe's going to describe what we mean by holding it back shortly. So either you're being shackled and being held back, or representing significant risk. So obviously legacy modernization projects, right, are about solving those problems by replacing those old risky systems and unshackling the business, enabling new ways of working and kind of modern software services. Because of their nature, often these programs of work can start as bottom-up sort of technology-led initiatives. And they are hard, right? There's no getting away from it. They're often really big and they're really hard and they're really risky. You've got lost knowledge of the old systems. What did they do? Why do they do what they do? What do the business actually need? How might the business need to change? What might be the disruption and impacts to the business by going through these sort of projects? So it is really far from easy. And the first case that we often see is where the systems have gone out of support, right? So you're running your business using a kind of a critical piece of software or a platform, middleware, but it's now out of support. That really represents significant and real risk to your business. And these types of projects, kind of replacing system A with a new system B, are often seen as a purely technical challenge. Okay, so surely, the simplest thing that we could do is going to be to replace with a like for like, right? My business isn't broken now, so don't fix it, okay? But we can minimize our scope by just doing a like for like replacement. And that sounds really reasonable, but it's kind of a bit of a trap, right? And we often underestimate what's actually involved in creating this like for like. And the engagement that you're going to need with the business to make those inevitable scope kind of decisions and prioritization decisions. And actually, let alone the reality is the business probably don't even want the system that they have now, right? Because they're maybe being held back as well. Because it's a binary replace A with B kind of problem, there's a tendency to build and switch over to this new system like with a big bang and a big bang migration. And there are loads of risks associated with kind of massive big bang releases. Yes, they can be successfully kind of mitigated with hugely detailed plans and kind of execution and practice, but also you can mitigate those kind of risks by exploring an incremental approach, right? And doing these things piece by piece.
Cool. And the second big risk area that we see with legacy modernizations is, as Rob mentioned, the business being held back by legacy tech. So this means spiraling cost of change makes it impossible for the business to make improvements or be agile in the face of market conditions, which means it's not tapping into growth opportunities or keeping up with competitors or increasing expectations of users. So the business is finding it hard to grow. But that doesn't mean that it doesn't stop or slow down. In fact, it finds a path. And often those alternate paths are really hard to see. And from my experience, people cease to amaze me with the creative and innovative workarounds that they put in place to keep the business running and growing. So when you're working on a legacy modernization program, you need to make a base assumption, really, that there's a significant amount of stuff happening outside of this legacy view of systems that the business has put in place to run and to grow and to reach its business goals. So what does that mean for us as a program when you're approaching this? essentially it's if you attempt to understand scope purely from a technical architecture perspective, so essentially a kind of bottoms up analysis of everything that we have, what's our estate, what are the features, what do they do, then you're going to miss all of that stuff that's been put in around the scenes, those workarounds. And often those are business critical things that the business is relying on to run. So we call those scope icebergs. Or scope bergs for short, if you want to get into it. But these things are lurking out there, just waiting for you to majorly disrupt your kind of carefully crafted plans to put in place of like moving this thing over to a new shiny platform. And we're going to take you through some ways of finding and de-risking those things. So I guess that leads on to the next is that from our experience, Rob and I have this hypothesis that making architectural thinking and practices more user-centered, so kind of merging the two together and bringing more of the thinking from both sides helps us de-risk some of those key challenges that we're facing in legacy modernization. So user-centered practices, they help widen your view of that bottom-up analysis that you do and avoid those scope icebergs. And they also enable an incremental delivery approach that reduces the risk of that big bang thinking and just replacing like for like. That's something that the business might even need, but it's really all about risk and reducing both technical and business risk of these complex programs. So we talked a little bit about why and what you see in a legacy modernization, but how do you actually do it? Well, we're going to share 3 practices that we've used on legacy modernization programs that we've seen work successfully, and that's putting people in pictures, telling the story of the business, and moving beyond decommissioning.
So first of all, putting people in your pictures. I guess before I dive into that, a quick aside, right? So I think I've been an architect. I continue to be an architect. What does that kind of mean? Well, it means I do architecture and I create architecture. It's a practice. It's a way of thinking, as well as the pictures, right? And the artifacts and the decision records and those kind of things that architects create. So where we're focusing on this is actually that you'll be maybe pleased to know, judging by the responses earlier, I'm not going to be focusing on the pictures and the kind of how we structure systems and that kind of stuff. We're going to be focusing actually on the practices and the kind of the mindset and thinking. So what does kind of putting people on your pictures actually kind of look and feel like, right? So, architecture is an abstraction. It's about figuring out how to represent really complex landscapes, systems, and problems in a way that become consumable by people, how you can break those big problems up and kind of evolve your systems and your business into, a new place where you want to be. But often, right, I see architectural views and technology kind of pictures with no users on them. Like, really? Yeah. Have we abstracted our thinking so far that there is no human beings left who have any interest in either using, supporting, or getting value from our systems? Right? No, I don't think that's true. I've yet to find a kind of a system context that's got nobody interested in its existence. Okay, so there's obviously something wrong. If you see pictures with no people on them, right, that's got to be a red flag. And if that's level 0, then level 1 is some kind of anonymous, abstract representation of people. So maybe it's like the stick figure user, maybe even it's some kind of abstract role. And that's better. But the question I think you should ask yourself is like, given this role, given this abstraction on this picture, like, do I know who I would pick the phone up to if I had a question or a puzzle? What does that figure, who does that figure represent, or which team, which individuals does that figure represent? So we need to move beyond that. I believe you should move beyond that, and you should be able to ideally put a name, put needs, put desires, put puzzles, put challenges onto that, into that figure. So take it out of the abstract, back into the real world, into the concrete. How do you do that? Well, there's a couple of practices that that I've been introduced to kind of recently, or like in the last sort of 4 or 5 years or so, that really have helped with that. So the first is the day in the life. Now, day in the life is essentially a whole team research session. Okay, so all the team participate. We break up into small groups. We sit with the business and the users of the systems, just to understand like their pain points, how they use the systems, and what are the jobs that they're doing. In person is best. You get to see the surroundings, you get to build rapport much easier, but you can do this remotely. And we see like the kind of engagement with the whole modernization program really kicks off and catalyzes with doing this as a practice. The program or the technologists kind of become visible and tangible, and people feel that the program is being done with them, not just to them. So that's really awesome. This is one of those things I would recommend asking for permission first, not forgiveness. So try and arrange with sort of technical leadership that you're going to do this. It will be a little bit disruptive, but you can explain the benefits of why, and it will really get a buzz going. That's actually me in the picture there, sat drinking my coffee. I was reminded when I sat with some users and watching them really diligently kind of following through their playbook of their kind of the to-do list that they needed to do on that day. And let's say this is Joe, was checking a report on the system, had printed it off and was checking it and was using that to cross-check a screen on the system. And I've been kind of talking with some architects, and I had come to learn that there had been some changes under the hood, right, recently. And so I was kind of asking Joe, like, so just let me explain. You're downloading a report and then you're using that to check the screen on the system. I said, okay, is that ever wrong? Is it ever different? Because I knew underlying was the same database. Okay, so what happened? And well, the answer was no, it is never wrong. And it was awesome. Joe just got his playbook and ripped the page out, tore it up into pieces and threw it away. It's like amazing. How agile is that? But like behind the scenes, technology had changed and the why something was being done had been forgotten, right? Maybe there was some kind of instances previously where the data was different and that caused pain for the business, but that knowledge had been lost. And Gabe mentioned earlier about these scope icebergs, right? This is your first opportunity to look out for the warning signs of them. So spreadsheets, lots of spreadsheets. That's a sign the stuff's happening off system. Workflow done inside email systems and kind of using folders for organizing messages, right? That's another warning sign. And there's these reports, there's operational task lists and Post-it notes everywhere, kind of like detailing tasks and things to be done. Potentially, that's another sign. So once you've done these kind of days in the life, a really great way of summarizing that and then sharing it, with the whole team and broadly is just use empathy mappings. This is from Dave Gray. It really just helps you kind of capture, document what you found, asking some sort of different questions from different perspectives. And you can link from your pictures back to these empathy maps to really bring the people sort of to life. So the benefits of doing this, right? It brings those people, the users, out of the dark, brings their needs into focus, transforms them from abstract into real people, gives you those early warning signs of the scope icebergs you're going to need to look out for, builds empathy, deep empathy for your whole team. It means that the impacts of CFR, so cross-functional requirements, things like usability, reliability, performance, you actually really understand the impacts of those things in real terms, right? If the screen X is really slow, that's going to be so super painful for poor Joe because he's on that screen hundreds of times a day. So, things like that kind of brings what otherwise abstract thinking into the real and makes it really concrete.
Cool. So I'm going to tell you about our second practice, which is telling the story of the business. So what does that look like? Essentially, it's mashing up user journeys with tech. So users, who are the people? What do they do? What's their role? What are the tasks that they need to do? The business, essentially the journeys that and outcomes that user behavior is contributing to, the things that are running your business. And technology, what's enabling the people in the business to run, or in a lot of legacy modernization, what's holding them back. But this view of everything working together is really powerful. So how do you get there? Well, there's lots of different ways of bringing these two things together. But two practices that we found really useful were service maps and storyboards, because they're user-centered. They bring tech into the picture, and they bring a narrative of the business to life. And that creates this nice balanced view between product design and engineering that makes discussions and trade-offs a lot easier. It visualizes it to make to bring that to the surface. So starting with storyboards. So what are those, and how can they be used? So this is scenario focused. It's focuses on what different jobs users are doing and the tools they use to do that. So it brings in tasks of the business, but also tools and technology of what they're focusing on. And this is really a catalyst for technical and non-technical audience. And that's really where the storytelling resonates with both of those. It helps build that shared understanding. And one way that we use these, we were about a year into a modernization project for an e-commerce client, and we just kept going in circles around designing pricing for products. We were mapping out the journey and design, and we just kept on going around. And there was just this circular conversation happening. We would design something, run it through with the team, but it just wasn't landing with the PO, and the architects were kind of, scratching their head about how to support this. And then one of the client architects, they said, what we need here is one of Gabe's storyboards. And it kind of took me by surprise. I was like, wow, okay, like that was useful to you? Like, I thought that was just, all the stuff that I was trying to do to map stuff out. So it really hit home around how useful these were to different audiences, technical and non-technical, and that it wasn't just a design tool, but a way to visualize discussion and kind of make that more tangible. So moving on to service maps, also called service blueprints, if you've heard that term. These map out an end-to-end journey of the user, but also front to back. So how does it operate? And that shows how the business is running and what tech enables it to run. So here, often teams jump into mapping how the future will look with a service map, but usually there's big assumptions made about how the business runs and the features that exist today. And going back to what we're talking about, that's usually based off of an architectural view of the business and what features are out there, not of the stuff that's around the seams. So doing an as-is view of this really helps to uncover those things. So if we go back to what Rob was discovering in the day in the life, spreadsheets. So this is a chance to dive in. Do they have macros? What things are these driving? Who created them? Who are the users of them? Workflow done in emails, like with Outlook folders. What are the systems that need to be linked up? What are the, what are the endpoints that people are working through? What tasks are people doing with those? System reports that are driving some of those operational tasks. How many of those? Is it 4? Is it 200? Those are vastly different things. And where's the data coming from? Where's the original source? And post-it notes, is that indication of missing systems, things that are hard to use? All of these things can be indicators and show you the kind of iceberg, reveal it. Is it just that small thing that you need to worry about later, or is it this big, massive, chunky thing that actually you should probably de-risk upfront because it's just gonna, become a thorn in your side later? So, so some of these are two of these are practices that I think can help you do that. Work through those things, and so what happens? So what happens when you do these things? Well, I think ultimately it's de-risking that that scope that you find later, and that can throw things off. So if you do these things, it's going to help you mitigate that risk and build really only what's needed and avoid big development changes later on. You create a joined up experience for users. because you've identified the points at which they're interacting and need to run their business tasks. Void delays in product releases and milestones, and also with legacy modernizations, a big thing is that conversation you've had with the business early on about what you're promising them, the things that you say this is going to deliver. If you have scope that creeps into your plan later on, it's going to push that stuff out. That's going to be release 1, 2, 3, and the business can take a few of those things, but it starts eating away at the trust of you delivering a successful program.
Cool. So lastly, moving beyond decommissioning. Now, I'm conscious of time and want to leave a little bit of time for questions, although I do intend to be hanging out in the chat kind of afterwards. So I might talk a little bit quicker than planned, but I'll try not to too much. Yeah, moving beyond decommissioning, maybe a little bit kind of like controversial, but essentially kind of like, I believe the fastest path to being able to decommission a system is the same as the fastest path to creating and transitioning to a viable alternative, right? We know how to build products quickly that are user-driven, kind of user-focused, using all of our great product development and kind of agile techniques, right? So if you apply a similar thinking to decommissioning or to a legacy modernization program, you at least create your alternative product quickly. The remaining part of the challenge is how you cut over to it. And the business goal of getting rid of that really high risk system is absolutely valid and remains. But this is just a subtle kind of change of thinking. So what it looks like is, no longer being just purely technology led, but now a collaboration between product design and technology. It's no longer just about the feature parity. I want to replace system A with system B, where they do exactly the same thing. It's now actually a focus on what's the viable alternative, what the business actually really need and really want to operate their business. And let's build that as quickly as possible. And it's about moving away from or beyond kind of a big bang approach to executing your program using a kind of an incremental roadmap instead. And how might you get there? Well, firstly, I think it's about changing language. So move away from kind of legacy system decommissioning to legacy system displacement. And that's from big bang to piece by piece kind of change. And it's not about technology modernization, it's about business modernization. You're taking the opportunity that this legacy modernization program kind of presents to you to not only address technical concerns, but also enhance and improve your business. So you can clarify goals and your measures of success. Again, so rather than a binary goal of switch off system A, how about something that's a bit more, or gives you optionality, right? So what about operate? I want to be able to operate my business without reliance on the legacy and without impacting the quality of service as measured by KPIs, right? It's kind of concrete. It's got measures of success, but it means I can operate part of my business without reliance on the system, which gives me all kinds of benefits, right? So I can use incremental and continuous delivery. And I want to make that the new norm. I don't want to disappear into a shed for 2 years and come out with a brand new system and go, ta-da, here you are. Because in that time, I've learned how not to produce software in an incremental way and continuously release it to the business. So we need to start as we mean to go on. We need to be, delivering our replacement systems incrementally. And we need to break the problem up. And this is really hard. But if you bring all of the tools and power and knowledge of your users and your designers and your products people and your technologists together, you'll find all kinds of creative ways which will help you to break the problem up into bits. And when you do, it's all about reducing that technical operational business risk. You can deliver value and change earlier. You get increased visibility of progress because you're able to unlock incremental delivery. So summarizing.
So the first thing is, first practice we're talking about is that Rob was talking about is putting people in your pictures. So this brings those people out of the dark onto your maps, into your conversations, and not just as anonymous stick figures and users, but as who they are, what their roles are, what are their needs, and links to empathy maps and personas that the team can use and are well versed in. So it's about bringing those practices into that.
And Gabe described techniques you can use to tell the story of the business, right? So in order to get somewhere, you've got to actually be somewhere. So things like using the kind of the mashup of user journeys and technical architecture, creating your service blueprints, lets you know where you are, helps you identify those scope icebergs that you're going to need to try and avoid. And really, in my experience, this is like a really awesome example of kind of like lightweight, consumable, relatable, and actually useful enterprise architecture in action. Yeah, it's fantastic. Helps you get rid of those Skype icebergs and brings user-centered design into architecture.
I think we've invented scopebergs as a term. I think that's going to take off. So, and then the last practice we're talking about is that power of language, and how moving from decommissioning as a kind of technical focused gets everybody mindset thinking about just what the features are and what the tech and the systems are, to bringing it to more business language of how do we create a viable alternative for the business to run on, and then how do you break that up into different pieces, helping you find the seams of the different problems. So architecture and product and design and engineering can work together to figure out an incremental way of delivering it, rather than a quite a risky big bang thinking approach. So thank you everyone for tuning in. Hope you found those practices helpful. Yeah, well, I think we have a little bit of time for questions, but back to you, Sabrina.
Thank you, Gabe and Rob. We do indeed have time for questions. So everyone on your screens at home and the office, type them quickly into the chat. But I want to say thank you, Gabe and Rob. It was really inspiring to kind of hear how you kind of turn this architecture topic on its head, because UX is sometimes seen as something as nice to have that's added later. And how you've highlighted is that actually it's something that has to be ingrained from the start, because if we don't, it becomes risky business. And I think changing that language, and you talked about changing language from a nice to have, where wouldn't it be nice if people are happy using this, to actually, by bringing this in from the start, we're de-risking what we're doing for the business. And that's a language that the business already has. So we kind of just, connecting to that and then speaking the language of our stakeholders. So I think that's really inspiring to see. Now, I love the practices that you shared, and I wonder, how do you like nudge that door open? So those monetization topics often sit in the tech silo within an organization. So what you described is really new and different. So I guess, how do you open it up within that silo? And how do you then involve people beyond that? Because all those have a stake in a way in that transformation as well.
I'll have a first crack, and then I'm sure Gabe will chip in. What was interestingly for me was how when we were working on this kind of more recent project, right, there's some really great kind of architectural thinking at a very high level had already been done on how we might group together and reimagine the kind of business capabilities into new kind of groups and placed onto a city plan, which gave us kind of like a really high level view of how the problem might be split up to start with. And then we essentially spun up project teams who had a kind of an inception. So for people that don't know, like a series of activities, quite lean, really high intensity, but designed to uncover scope, uncover risk, come up with a plan, those sorts of things. So some of the activities that we did as part of the inception was actually the day in the life, the empathy mapping, sharing technology landscapes. So that in a way, like the practices weren't so new or so hard to introduce, but then it was then that the mashup to create the service blueprint that was kind of a new thing. And then because we had opened the door during inception, we were able to keep those practices going throughout the program, which, yeah, just proved to be super, super helpful.
And I'll add in something, I guess, a little bit different, because it is hard to get people to adopt new things, especially because they have their ways of working, and it can be really hard to convince or persuade people to try something new. So I think the things that Rob said really help, bringing them into already established ways of working, and incremental changes there can be really useful. I think the other opportunity is where you hit problems or a crisis. And those are opportunities to describe the risk. That risk language is really a business one and technical one, but using that as a way to say, there's some risk out there and we're going to run into some problems. These things could help us to avoid that or to lessen it, de-risk it. And I think that speaks quite a strong language to how you can introduce some of these things. Oh, okay, there's something to help here. Like, we see these problems, and especially if everybody's feeling the problems, that's even more so. It's like, okay, well, what do we do? And so being armed with some of these things to bring in at those points, it can be important, can be helpful, rather than just trying to throw them all in at the start and say, this is, what we're going to do.
So that's really exciting to hear. So one way of kind of taking people on the journey is like in that kickoff and the inception, bringing some of those methods and ingraining them again from the start into the ways of working.
Yeah, I'll build on that a little bit. And basically, if you need to plan those kickoff activities to be outcome focused and kind of co-create them, like with your customer, or with the client, with the whole program. And if they're very outcome focused, then you have the why behind your doing, the why do we want to do these activities? And as Gabe described, right, it's all about the risk mitigation.
And while co-creating this kickoff together, have you encountered any resistance? Because yes, I mean, tech architecture, it's new to say, like, or not for me actually, but in some contexts, it might be a new concept to say, okay, we actually have to think about the user. Did you encounter resistance in some contexts, and how did you approach it? How did you persuade people that that's a good idea to just kind of trust the process and to go along with it?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I think there's a few different ways, but it's always really different. It's one of those, it depends on the context. But I think there's a real power to establishing relationships early on, and not just talking about it. It's because of what I say. It's like, no, that's not the point. It's like, we're all trying to achieve this shared outcome, take it back to a goal that you're all trying to move towards. And it's not just because I'm bringing in something and I think we should do design early, and and I want to move it earlier in the life cycle. It's like, no, that's not the point. The point is that it can help us with the outcome that we're trying to achieve. So I think talking to people and building those relationships one-to-one can build that trust between people around, hey, I'm in this for the team. I'm not in this for myself. Like, I'm not trying to just push design because I'm a designer. It's like, no, I'm bringing this mindset to try to help us achieve something.
Yeah, really, really nice point. And the focus on outcomes and what helps us get there, but also, yeah, building the trust and the relationships. I think these are really important parts to make things happen. So I'm looking at time. Thank you, Gabe and Rob. It was a pleasure listening to you talk. Thank you for sharing your experiences.